close your eyes for just a moment. The year is 1975, and the smell of a coal fire drifts through the hallway, while Radio Luxembourg crackles softly from the transistor under your pillow, and outside the window, the whole street belongs to the kids until tea time. Want to go back? Somewhere between the satisfying thud of conkers on a string in September and the smell of chips wrapped in newspaper on a Friday evening, Britain had something rare and unhurried in the 1970s, something that took decades to understand, something you can still feel if you close your eyes tightly enough and let yourself go back. Picture a typical British street in the middle of that decade, the kind you'd find in any town from Newcastle to Bristol, from Cardiff to Aberdeen. Terraced houses lined up in neat rows, their small front gardens separated by low privet hedges, trimmed on a Saturday morning by men in flat caps who nodded to each other across the fence without needing to say very much at all. Net curtains hung in every window, doorsteps were scrubbed, and somewhere at the end of the road a corner shop sat open from early morning until the evening news, its door propped with a rubber wedge in summer, its window plastered with handwritten cards advertising prams for sale and piano lessons and lost cats. The man behind the counter knew your mum's name. He knew your nan's order by heart. He knew which kids were allowed a slate and which ones had to pay up front. Nobody needed to explain the system. Everyone understood it, and it worked because everyone respected it. Inside those terraced houses, life followed a rhythm as solid and reliable as the ticking of the clock on the mantelpiece. The Littlewoods catalogue sat permanently on the kitchen table, its pages soft and dog-eared from months of handling, with pencil circles around the things the family might stretch to by Christmas. Mum had a tin on the shelf where she put a little aside from the wage packet each week. Not for anything specific, just because that was how you managed, how everyone managed, how it had always been done. And the radiogram stood against the wall like a piece of furniture that happened to play music, because that is exactly what it was. Green shield stamps got licked and stuck into their little books on the kitchen table on a Sunday evening, the pages filling slowly towards something useful. A set of towels, a kitchen gadget, something that felt genuinely earned. No central heating in most houses, a gas fire in the front room that everyone gravitated toward on dark November evenings, thick jumpers worn indoors without question, the whole family compressed into the one warm room, because that was simply where the warmth was. And in the bedrooms, on the coldest mornings, ice formed on the inside of the windows, not on the outside, on the inside. A thin white fern across the corner of the pane that you'd breathe on with the duvet pulled up to your chin, watching it melt slowly in the weak winter light. Hot water bottles were not a luxury, they were survival. Mornings started with the milkman. You heard him before you saw him, the clink and rattle of his float moving up the street while it was still dark. Glass bottles arranged on doorsteps with quiet professional pride. Full fat gold top if your family was feeling flush. The foil lids pecked through by blue tits on cold mornings, which somehow nobody minded. Then the postman, then the Corona fizzy drinks van that came to the door, and which felt, on the days it arrived, like a small visitation of something celebratory. And on certain mornings, the rag and bone man called from his cart in a sound that was more musical instrument than human voice, and you'd watch from the window, wondering what strange alchemy turned old junk into something he wanted. These were the known faces of daily life, recurring, dependable, as much a part of the street as the red telephone box on the corner or the pub at the end of the road that your dad walked to on a Friday evening with the same two men he'd been walking there with for 15 years. Nobody locked their back door when they nipped to the corner shop. The milk money sat in an envelope on the doorstep overnight and nobody touched it. Why would they? Everyone on the street knew everyone else's business, not in an unpleasant way, but in the way that happens naturally when people live close together for long enough that the boundaries between households become something more like suggestions. Your neighbours were not strangers you happened to share a postcode with. They were people who watched your kids without being asked, who knocked with a bowl of soup when someone was poorly, who kept an eye on things as a matter of course. Trust was not a value anyone discussed. It was simply the ground everything else was built on. And outside, from the moment the school holidays began, The street belonged entirely to the kids. Not the front room, not the garden. The whole street from one end to the other, every inch of it, your territory. You'd pour out of the front door after breakfast, still eating the last of your toast, and the day would open in front of you like something enormous and completely unhurried. The wreck was 10 minutes away. The croft behind the garages was closer. The bit of wasteland at the end of the estate, where someone had once started building something and then apparently thought better of it, was closer still, and considerably more interesting for a group of 8-year-olds with nothing particular to do and an entire morning to not do it in. No phone in your pocket, no screen competing for your attention, no notifications arriving to remind you that somewhere else might be more interesting than this. Just the street, your friends, and whatever the day decided to become. The games you played had rules that nobody wrote down and everybody knew. British Bulldog in the school field until someone got hurt badly enough to matter. Conkers in September, your best one hardened overnight in vinegar, even though everyone knew that was cheating and nobody cared. The drawstring bag of them kept in your coat pocket from the first of the month like a talisman. Marbles in the gutter along the curb, the good glass ones catching the light, traded and won and lost, with the seriousness of a stock exchange that happened to be conducted at ankle height. Hopscotch chalked onto the pavement outside your house. And go-karts, built from old pram wheels and planks of wood, a length of rope for the steering, the whole thing assembled in someone's back garden over a weekend, with a borrowed hammer and absolute conviction. No instructions, no adult supervision, just kids working out the engineering as they went, testing it on the hill behind the library, rebuilding what broke, testing it again. The summer of 1976 was the backdrop to all of this. 10 weeks of relentless heat, the kind that has never come again before or since. The tarmac soft underfoot, the grass on the wreck burnt to the colour of straw, standpipes appearing in the street where the water supply gave up entirely. You were outside from dawn to dusk for the whole of it, skin permanently brown, knees permanently grazed, and it felt like the summer would simply never end. Decades later, people who were children that year still talk about it the same way. Not as a heat wave, as a gift. Bikes were freedom on 2 wheels, not expensive machines with gears and suspension, just a bike, usually second-hand, usually slightly too big when you first got it, and slightly too small by the time you were done with it. A rally handed down from an older sibling with the saddle lowered and the brakes tightened by your dad on a Sunday afternoon. You rode it until the chain came off, and then you turned it upside down on the pavement and fixed it yourself because there was nobody else to do it, and also because you were 9 and fixing the chain yourself felt genuinely important. You rode with no hands down the hill behind the library. You skidded sideways on gravel and inspected the damage to your knees with the detached curiosity of someone conducting a minor scientific survey. No helmets, no knee pads, no rules except the one. The one rule that sat above all the others, unwritten and absolute, understood by every child in every street, in every town, from one end of the country to the other. Be in for your tea. Not a suggestion, not a guideline. A law as fixed and serious as anything handed down from on high, enforced not just by your own parents but by the neighbourhood itself. When your mum's voice came out of the back door and carried down the street, you moved. Didn't matter if you were winning, didn't matter if the go-kart had just reached the fastest it had ever gone. Didn't matter if you were halfway across the estate, deep in some adventure that felt genuinely unmissable. You got on your bike or you picked up your feet and you went home, because tea meant family, and family meant you showed up, and the kitchen you came home to smelled like nothing else on earth. Fish fingers and beans on a Wednesday, reliable as the weather was unreliable. Tinned tomato soup from a Heinz can, exactly the same every single time, which was entirely the point. Vesta beef curry from a cardboard box on a Friday, boiling a separate bag of rice, the whole production feeling extraordinarily exotic in a way that is very difficult to explain to anyone born after 1985. And if your dad came home with chips wrapped in newspaper, their heat and vinegar smell filling the hallway the moment the front door opened, that was a very good Friday indeed. After tea, the telly went on. not during, after. And in 1975 there were 3 channels, which sounds like deprivation and was the opposite, because when everyone had the same 3 channels, everyone watched the same things, and when everyone watched the same things, everyone had something to talk about. The test card on Saturday morning while you ate your cereal, waiting for the programmes to start at 9, the slightly unsettling clown in the corner of the screen that you watched with one eye while the other stayed on the clock, then Swap Shop or Magpie filling the morning, then the afternoon, opening up into whatever the day had left to offer. Top of the Pops on Thursday evening was not optional. You sat in front of it and watched and argued about the chart positions, and it was the same conversation happening in living rooms, the length and breadth of the country, at exactly the same moment. The Generation Game on Saturday, Bruce Forsyth working the audience with the ease of a man born to it. Starsky and Hutch and the professionals talked about in every playground on Monday morning. The James Bond film at Bank Holidays, appointment television before anyone called it that. Eric Morecambe at Christmas, the whole family in one room, nobody moving. But the radio ran underneath all of it like a second heartbeat. Tony Blackburn on Radio 1 in the morning, relentlessly cheerful in a way your dad found baffling and your mum found reassuring. The football classified results on a Saturday afternoon, that particular cadence, read in a tone suggesting the reader had been doing this job since the beginning of recorded time and intended to continue indefinitely. And at night, after lights out, Radio Luxembourg. The signal fading in and out as you held the transistor under the pillow, the top 20 counting down toward the number 1, while the house settled into silence around you. Lying in the bath on a Sunday evening with the radio balanced on the edge, waiting to hear where your favourite had landed that week. The anticipation of it as good as the answer. Shared culture was not something anyone planned or organised. It was simply what happened when everybody had the same 3 channels and the same tea time and the same crackling signal drifting in from Luxembourg after dark. It bound people together without anyone noticing it was doing so, the way mortar holds bricks, invisible and essential, and only apparent when you look for it. The dinner table was where the day came to rest. Not the telly, not the sofa, not anywhere else. The table, with everyone squeezed in around it, elbows occasionally touching. Someone always needing to get up for the sauce. No television blaring in the background. No distraction pulling anyone's eyes away from the people sitting right in front of them. Just forks on plates and glasses of squash and someone asking how your day went and you actually answering with real details because there was nothing else competing for your attention and nowhere else any of you needed to be. Arctic roll from the freezer on a Sunday, the ceremony of slicing it, the thin layer of jam between the sponge and the ice cream that somehow made the whole thing feel considered. Wagon wheels from Nan's bag when she visited, enormous in your hand, the chocolate yielding in a way it somehow no longer does. These were not elaborate pleasures. They were exact and specific, and they were yours, and they tasted the way things taste when you are young enough to be entirely present for them. On certain evenings, the shape of the night was fixed and sacred. The FA Cup final, the whole family gathered in the front room, your dad leaning forward in his chair. The Queen's speech on Christmas afternoon, the television turned up slightly, your Nan sitting closest to the set. These were not just programmes. They were the moments when you understood, without anyone explaining it, that you were part of something larger than your own household, that millions of other families in millions of other front rooms were watching the same screen at the same moment, and that this fact meant something. And before Christmas came bonfire night. For weeks beforehand, things disappeared from back gardens across the street. Old furniture, broken pallets, anything that would burn, contributed without discussion to the communal pile at the end of the road. On the night itself, you stood right around the fire, close enough to feel the heat on your face and the cold on your back simultaneously, sparklers writing your name in the dark air. No cordon. No managed distance, just the neighbourhood gathered around the flames and the sky cracking open overhead. Then September would arrive. You could smell it before you could see it, that particular combination of cooler air and wet pavements, and something just slightly different about the quality of the morning light. The summer was ending and the year was turning, and you knew it in your body before the calendar confirmed it. The new school year meant a new exercise book. its pages completely blank and smelling of possibility in a way that lasted about 4 days before the possibility became homework. It meant covering your school books in leftover wallpaper, orange and purple geometrics, wood chip if your mum hadn't got to it first, smoothing it down with the flat of your hand. It meant the walk to school in the early dark of an October morning, your satchel bumping against your hip, your friend from the next street falling into step beside you without any arrangement being made. Nobody drove you. Walking was not a lifestyle choice or an act of independence. It was just how you got to school, from age 7, alone or with whoever happened to be heading the same way, through whatever the weather decided to do. Some mornings you saved the bus fare and walked the extra distance, spending the money on a mix-up of sweets from the corner shop, the paper bag rustling in your pocket all the way to the gates. School itself was structured in ways that felt permanent and reliable. Teachers had authority that nobody questioned. You did your homework because that was what you did. You stood when an adult entered the room, called your teacher sir or miss, accepted consequences that did not stop at the school gate. If you got in trouble at school, you got in trouble at home. Double jeopardy with no appeals process. And at morning break, the milk arrived. Glass bottles with foil tops in a wire crate, one per child. The straw pierced through with a satisfying puncture, cold in winter and unpleasantly warm in summer. The part of the year that everyone waited for, the thing that sat at the end of summer like a reward the whole family had collectively earned, was the holiday, not a flight somewhere warm. A week at the British seaside, packed into the Ford Cortina with a tartan blanket over the luggage, and a bag of boiled sweets for the journey, and at least one argument about whose side of the back seat the invisible line fell on. If you were from the north, the tower visible from miles out, the Golden Mile delivering exactly what it promised. Scarborough with its castle on the headland and its 2 bays. Every town with its own version of the same essential things. Rock with the town's name running all the way through it. The coach trip to see the Blackpool illuminations if your nan was organising it. Her flask of tea with evaporated milk. The windows steaming up as the lights appeared on the horizon. And everyone leaned toward the glass at once. The Candlewick bedspread. Rain on Tuesday and Wednesday. Cards on the bed in the afternoon. Nobody particularly devastated because the rain was simply part of it, and you adapted because adapting was what you did. Those holidays were not about luxury. They were about the family unit compressed together for a week, eating chips from newspaper on a bench with seagulls, conducting aerial surveillance from 3 feet above your head. You can't explain this to someone who wasn't there. Not really. You can describe the rock and the rain and the Candlewick bedspread and the smell of vinegar carried on a sea breeze, but the thing underneath all of that resists description. It was the feeling that life was the right size, that the people around you were the right people. And not all of those people are still here. Some of them are absent now in the way that people become absent quietly and permanently, leaving only the memory of how it felt to be young alongside them. That is what you are really protecting when you close your eyes and go back. Not the things, the people. Close your eyes. Go back to 1975. The bread is toasting under the grill. The ice on the bedroom window has almost melted. Somewhere down the street, Radio Luxembourg is fading in and out of a transistor radio, and the day is just beginning, and it belongs entirely to you. You couldn't have known then how rare that was. You can only know it now. If this brought someone back to you that you hadn't thought about in a while, watch the next one.